Welcome to the meeting of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board of the City of San Angelo. Edward, do you mind to read the public comment, please?
The board takes public comment on all items in the regular agenda. Public input on a regular agenda item will be taken at its appropriate discussion. Public input on an item not on the agenda or consent agenda may be identified and requested for consideration by the board at this time. The board may request an item to be placed on a future agenda or for a consent agenda item to be moved to the regular agenda for public comment.
Thank you. Consent agenda, consideration of approving the October 25th, 2018 minutes. Do we have any comment? In that case, do we have a motion to approve?
Chairman, I move that we accept the minutes.
Thank you, Kenneth. Second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So the motion is approved. Now we go to the regular agenda. And the first item on the agenda is discussion of the purpose and role of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board.
Our City Attorney, Teresa James, will give the presentation. She's been giving a similar presentation to every board and commission of the city.
That's right. I'm Teresa James. I think I've met all of you before, and it has been over the past year or so that we've been going to as many of the boards and commission meetings as we can to make sure that the board members understand their roles, as well as to address some concerns we've noticed, maybe not specifically for this board, but just generally regarding compliance with the open meetings rules. So today we're going to talk about the purpose and role of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. You might know that we at City Council have recently approved all of the codes of ordinances related to boards and commissions generally. And what we've done is we've tried to make as many of the rules the same across the boards so that it's easier for the board members, it's easier for the city clerk, it's easier for my office to understand when somebody's violating a rule. So the first thing I'm going to go through is some of the general requirements that we have approved through the code. The first is that you have to hold a monthly meeting. Now that's been pretty standard across boards, but some of our boards and commissions had a rule that said you can't cancel a meeting, even if there's nothing to discuss. So we would still hold a meeting, they would come up here to this facility, and then we would have to cancel a meeting. So the general rule now, based on the code, is that meetings can be canceled if there's no business. That is typically decided by city staff, although they need to consult with the board chair to see if they believe that there's anything that needs to be discussed. Council appoints 7 members. Those 7 members can be removed, however, with a 2/3 vote of council. And that is important for this board. Technically, your board has 8, which I'll discuss in a minute, but 7 of you are appointees of council members. Anybody who's an appointee of a council member can be removed just by a vote of council without cause. I, in my time here, have never seen that happen here. I'm not sure I've seen that happen in my 15 years of being a city attorney. Generally, if a council member has a problem with somebody's on the board, they discuss it, and the person, it either resolves or the person leaves. All of your terms are 2 years, and they instituted term limits, saying that you can serve no more than 3 consecutive terms. Now, there was a lot of discussion at council as to whether or not that rule starts now or it counts the terms you're currently appointed to, and the decision was that it would count any terms you've already been appointed to. So the only term that wouldn't count currently is if you came onto this board because somebody resigned and you filled a partial term initially. That does not count in your term limits, but all other terms do. Some other provisions that I'm not seeing on here, so I don't know if it didn't translate well, but if you fail to attend 2/3 of the meetings, that is deemed to be a resignation unless your bylaws address what an excused absence is and you meet whatever those requirements are. We did also put a provision in there that all the bylaws need to be reviewed and make sure they conform to this new ordinance. So that will be something that we'll be bringing forward to you. You all serve without compensation. I think that goes without saying. And there's citywide ethics rules and conflict of interest rules that have been adopted, which essentially say, if you want specifics, I can talk the details with you individually, or if you think you might have a conflict. But basically, if you or a member of your family have a personal or financial interest in something that's being discussed, you probably shouldn't discuss it. And again, if those questions come up, I'd ask that you just come and talk to me about it, and we can kind of hash through what the rule specifically says so that you can determine whether or not you need to recuse yourself. So we have the General Code of Ordinances in this general section that applies to all boards and commissions, but then you have some specific requirements for this board just by the nature of the board. And one of those is, even though council appoints 7 members, this is actually an 8-member board. And the reason for that is the 8th member is a member of the Parks Commission that sits on this board. And Carl, do you know who that member is?
Allison Watkins, she's not here today. She's usually on that end.
Okay, that is the one member who the 2/3 vote of council doesn't remove them from this board. That is a position that's, from the Parks Commission, and that's just going to have to stay that way. Your rules also designate that 5 members is a quorum, and that the majority of members present pass items. So some rules on boards is that it always takes 4 members to pass, regardless if there's 4 members here or there's 7 members here. This is the majority of those present, which is actually a much easier rule to get things passed. Now, this is the part that I really want to talk to boards about, because when I first came here, there was I don't want to say boards were like out of control, but there was a little bit of out of control on some of the boards and commissions in the city, that they didn't really understand what their role was. And so in the Code of Ordinances, most of our boards are given very specific duties. For the purposes of this board, you are an advisory board to council. What that means is that you have no final authority on anything. Everything that you're deciding is just a recommendation to council based on your expertise and interest in the Parks and Recreation Department. But even that advisory nature is somewhat limited by the code. It's matters of oversight and policy and administration. That relates to city parks and recreation programs and facilities. Now, the one exception to that is Santa Fe Park. We do, through the deed language and how the city acquired that park, there is a separate Parks Commission that does, assist the city in making decisions about Santa Fe Park. But all the other parks and facilities in the city, you guys have some say in. And more than just that general language, your ordinance specifically spells out more specifically what the duties are. So these recommendations that you can give to council include parks, recreation programs, and senior services programs, the creation of parks in the recreation system, maintenance of any of the facilities, acquisition of physical improvements of equipment, and then the rules and regulations for park and recreation programs. Now, that doesn't mean that Carl may not on occasion bring you something that's not listed on here. So for instance, CIP is not listed on here. So Carl wants your input on the CIP program, but it's not something that's outlined as a responsibility of this board to give recommendations on CIP. So occasionally board members will, get a little bit upset because they weren't asked about something. If it doesn't fall within these duties, there's no obligation for staff to bring it to the board. So before we go on to the Open Meetings Act, are there any questions about any of that? Nope. All right, let's talk about the Texas Open Meetings Act. Now, I'm a big stickler on the Texas Open Meetings Act, and I know from the outsider's view it sometimes seems a bit silly. But there's some pretty strict penalties that can come with violations of this act, and so we don't want anybody to go to jail or get fined because you participated in a meeting wrongfully. But the general rule is that every regular, special, or called meeting must be open to the public and comply with the requirements of the act. You can't convene a meeting without quorum. So, for instance, if only 4 of you had come today, we would have to postpone this meeting till another day. We couldn't even convene the meeting, even if there's not a decision that's going to be made, because of the way that we've set you up and what the act says. Because you're an advisory board, there's no opportunity to go into executive session. You'll notice if you read social media, for sure, city council goes into executive session to discuss certain things. Pretty much everything, I will say, that goes into executive session is in there to have a discussion with me about something, whether it is my legal advice to them, whether it's negotiating a lease and how they want us to negotiate that, a contractual issue that if we talked about it in public would give an advantage to the other side. But because you don't have any final authority, there's no ability to go outside this room and off the record to have those conversations. I'm often asked, by board members, they don't want to have a conversation in public. That's not an exception to having a discussion in public. You have to meet one of the exceptions, and again, as an advisory board, you will not. All the meetings require proper posting 72 hours before the meeting. This is a requirement that staff meets for you. Occasionally, we'll have a board chair want to have a meeting more quickly than the 72 hours, and that's just not possible under the rules. So here's where the teeth of the act come in. Violations of this act can result in fines and/or incarceration. And generally, there's 4 different ways where board members can get in trouble for violations of the act. 2 of them, number 3 and number 4 that's listed, deal with executive session. And because your advisory can't go into executive session, you don't need to worry about those. So really, if you knowingly conspire to circumvent the act, the number 1 way that this happens, and it's highly litigated as to whether or not this constitutes a violation, is something called daisy chaining a meeting, where I'll meet with you, and then you'll meet with you, and then you'll meet with you, and you'll meet with you, till ultimately everybody's had a conversation, but nobody was in the same place at the same time. So that comes up in some other settings we'll talk about in a minute, but that's, if you're doing that because you don't want to have a public meeting to discuss it, that's where you can get in trouble with that provision. And the second is calling or participating in a closed meeting. So if the chair calls a meeting, knowing that there's quorum, has a discussion about board business, that can be a violation. This next point is a very important one. You can be convicted under the act even if you're unaware the meeting is illegal. So if you've been told by the chair that this is perfectly okay, talk to me, and I said it was fine, what you need to do is you need to call my office and ask for a written legal opinion saying it's fine. That's the way you get around, being in trouble for participating in these meetings. And that your knowledge really is not a big indicator as to whether or not there's going to be guilt or innocent in these cases. So some of the issues that come up are subcommittees. I know you guys had a subcommittee that dealt with CIP. Is that what y'all discussed recently? Projects around the lake?
Yes.
Yes, so subcommittees are great. They're a great way to do business and to make things more efficient. You just need to make sure that you don't have quorum at those committee meetings, because then that does constitute a meeting that has to be posted. Locations of meetings. Sometimes we have boards who want to meet out of town, or they want to meet in a room that's not big enough to accommodate the public. All these meetings have to be accessible to the public, which means it has to be a big enough space to accommodate the public. It can't be 50 miles out of town as sort of a retreat meeting. That's not really convenient for the public. And our preference is you have the meeting in a place where it can be recorded. This is coordinated with our media folks. We believe that these meetings discuss things that are important and interesting to the public, and so we want to have a record of them. And then social media. This is where I see more concerns, where I have more concerns about the actions of many people at the city, is the way that people interact on social media. Remember back when I was talking about quorum, and it could just be you talking to you, where you're not actually physically together. Well, there are some cases and some instances where people believe, attorneys believe, that comments on social media can constitute a meeting. If there's a discussion taking place and 5 of you comment on it, and it's something that's going to come before you, did you just have a discussion about public business without posting a meeting? There's an argument that says possibly. So I always discourage engaging. My social media is pretty boring. I mean, people come to my social media page to look for things. You'll see pictures of my kids. No real political things and really nothing that deals with city business, because that becomes an official opinion. So I would encourage everybody who's on a board to avoid engaging in discussions related to your board business on social media. If you want to make an announcement about something, that's great. If there's a poll that you're taking or somebody's taking and you want to post a link to that, that's great. When we're actually asking for input from people and you're dialoguing with them, that's where it starts to be a little more concerning. And you do have these meetings to make comments or ask questions if you have them. And then public comment period. This is like, in every city attorney that I know has received questions from their public or from their officials about public comment periods. Most cities do not have public comment periods unless they are required by law. Generally, that means that there's some ordinance that's being passed or a budget that's being passed where that's a legal requirement. The Act does not entitle citizens to speak at these meetings. These meetings are business meetings. They should be handled as business meetings. People can come and listen, but generally there's not a right to speak. We give people a right to speak here. So because we give them a right to speak, we should be aware of what the rules are and make sure that we keep control of those discussions. So we are allowed to have reasonable rules. Some of those that I if like today, it's not an issue, clearly. But when you come to a city council meeting dealing with STRs, the room is packed. We can limit the number of people who actually speak. And if you watched any of the discussion regarding STRs, you saw Mayor Morrison a couple of times say, how many people agree with this person? And people would raise their hands in the crowd, and he'd say, okay, we've noted that. You don't need to come up and speak on that. That's perfectly acceptable to do that. You can put a time limit on speakers. We have a 3-minute rule. That's what this little box right here does. It beeps whenever people come to their 3 minutes and they're supposed to stop speaking, or the chair can allow them to continue. It's completely at the discretion of the chair. You can also limit or exclude presentations. We get asked sometimes, well, can I show you my presentation? And the answer is generally no, mainly because we set these things up days in advance so that our media folks have time to go through it and make sure it's all set for us. And it's really difficult to just interject something into a meeting. But also that can really add time to a meeting that's not necessary. Y'all move. Questions during public comment. If we do have people here and they're asking questions, this is a time for them to express their opinions to you. It's not a time for dialogue with the board. Generally when they're coming up here, they're not supposed to be making just general public comments based on whatever is on the agenda. It's something that's not on the agenda they should be talking to you about. So therefore, if a question comes up during the public comment period, really the only responses should be the response with a policy, a statement of fact on the issue, or directing it to a next meeting to be discussed. There should be no back and forth dialogue, because then you're talking about something that's not listed on the agenda. The other thing that I see here that I've not really seen in other places that I've lived or worked is that there seems to be a tendency for people to come up during public comment period, but what they really want to do is interrogate staff about something. Public comment is for the opportunity for the decision makers, which is you guys, to hear them. It's not, they have all day, every day to call us and ask us questions if they want to ask questions, and we're very responsive. We'll talk to them. So comments should be directed towards the chair. If they say something that the chair is interested in hearing about, then the chair can surely, direct anybody in staff to come and speak to that issue. But it's not supposed to be, and it's not intended to be a time where staff is bombarded with questions or accusations. So that's it. Pretty quick and easy, right? So does anybody have any questions about any of that? Hopefully for most of you, it was just like a nice little refresher. All right, thank you guys.
No questions? Okay. Then let's go to the point number 2. Report on the Lake Nathworthy Improvements Committee and recommending any related matters. Carl?
This is a continuation of a discussion on the Parks and Recreation improvements at Lake Nasworthy. At the last meeting, the board directed staff or asked staff to form a committee to work in coordination with the Homeowners Association and with city management and the mayor to make sure that what we're talking about is coordinated with them. And so thankfully, Debbie set up a meeting as part of the committee, our committee, to talk about this. Present at the meeting, Debbie was present, Rick Abbott, Ray McKim with the Homeowners Association, Councilmember Tommy Hebert, Single Member District 1 was present, Steve Hampton from the board was present, Allison Struby with Water Utilities was there, Shane Kelton, Director of Operations, and myself. I think that was it. And so we talked about a full range of improvements, not just strictly Parks and Recreation related, as you see here on this list. And then in the end, and Debbie may want to talk about this too, but in the end, our list of things that we're talking about seriously to move forward for consideration of getting funded to do as part of the referendum are these listed here. The boat ramps, Beatty Road, South Concho Park, Knickerbocker Road, Fisherman's Road, and one that we had talked about but we didn't have on our high priority list was added at that meeting, the Red Bluff Ramp Road ramp. And then we talked about, timing and how to fund those boat ramp repairs and improvements. We talked about bathroom updates and replacements. Let me skip sewer. We talked about reed control, doing that annually, trying to control that and reduce it where we can. Understanding the need to keep some of those reeds for the fish habitat and the fishermen. A fishing pier replacement with adding a pergola at the end for rentable use. And then the different walking and jogging paths, one from the Southland area connecting to the lake, one around the hillside Gun Club Road area, up above the existing road. And then a lot of the discussion focused on the concerns about the capacity of the sewer system out there, which y'all are aware of as well, and the need to address that first before we tackle some of these improvements that might impact the sewer capacity there. And what was discussed at the end was there is a study that's being done regarding that. Allison Struby's coordinating that, and we should get the results of that end of January, early February. And once that comes in, we'll know better what improvements need to be done out there in terms of the sewer system at the lake. And so we probably won't meet again, the committee, until after that comes in, and we'll discuss that. I think there's interest from City Council to do these improvements, some of these improvements, and to figure out what the best timing is for that. But it's very likely that these improvements will involve some sewer infrastructure work. That's our report. Did you have anything to add, Debbie?
Job there.
Thank you.
Reviewing that, yep.
Any questions?
I have a question for you. Where do we go now? Because we have a list, and priority is very long. You didn't talk about funding. Did you think about the funding related to, I guess, public funds, but also the funds that the HOA has? That need a referendum, I think. So you
Yes.
use the word referendum. Where do we stand with all that?
Well, at the last meeting, and you weren't here, at the last meeting, that's when we were directed to set up the committee to work in coordination with the HOA and city management. And then once it kind of finalized what was going to go before the public, then the board would review that list and make a recommendation before council decided on moving it forward to the referendum. So we're not at that point yet. And in terms of funding, we call it a trust fund, but it's not really a trust fund, but the Lake Nasworthy account that holds the corpus, the principal of these monies, is about $14 million. A good portion of that would be eyed to be used for these improvements. And where we could, we would get grant funding for some of this work, like trail expansion, trail improvements, and for boat ramp and boating access improvements, which could include restrooms too, associated with boat ramps. Does that answer your question?
The only thing the board can do is really to recommend to go on with the process.
Right. I've written the caption so you could make a recommendation, but this is really just an update,
Right.
a report.
I think another point was, as far as the homeowners association, they're very interested in trying to, if we can apply for grants, like they're already been approved the funds to fix Middle Concho boat ramp. We want to try to stretch that money that's in the Lake Nasworthy fund as far as possible. So it makes a lot of sense to look at the projects that are on our list that might have grants that are available to apply for. So that's the other thing we're doing is fact-finding, finding out what on our list might be possible to get grants to help pay for those. So we can kind of plan on that as well.
Just a comment, it looks like the fund in the so-called HOA trust fund will not be sufficient to address, among other things, the sewer system. So definitely we need to add some funds.
We don't know that at this point.
Okay.
What was being looked at, just as a quick look, was about $7.5 million, perhaps. As
The homeowner association had come up with a list of some of these that you're seeing in front of you, and there's some additional ones as well. And their estimate was right around $7 million, the expenses for those. But again, that was something they put together. We don't know how close to reality those numbers are. But their point was they weren't wanting to spend the entire $14 million. They were wanting to spend part of that. So there's still going to be money left in for another improvement down the road.
So yes, I think there's some understanding that, I don't know what percentage, but some percentage of these funds could perhaps go towards sewer infrastructure repairs. And we don't have any idea what that might cost at this point.
And there's some options even there where possibly some of this money could be used to go toward the sewer improvements in the Lake Nasworthy area. And again, that's another one of those fact-finding missions that we're on at this point is if some of that money was to be used for that, could the fund be paid back through whatever improvements are made out at the lake as far as
Whoever taps into the new system.
right, exactly. So we're looking at those options as well.
Okay. Any more questions? Looks to me that was the first report on a subject that will take some time, and our interest is to get to the point where the public has defined what these improvements should be and what can be done with the money. So in the meantime, it will be a series of reports, okay?
Is there a deadline as far as getting something put on CIP?
Well, we're going to talk about that the next
Okay.
time.
Because I guess that would be a very big concern, you know.
Right. I'm not so concerned about the CIP window because it's opened up now for staff to submit, and we'll talk about that. But it's going to be opened up longer for the public. And if what we're able to do, maybe I should talk about it the next time. It's coming up. I'm not too concerned about that. I think we'll get in there.
Okay.
So basically, we'll be doing a follow-up meeting the latter part of February or middle of March, depending on when that sewer study is completed. But everyone that was present in the meeting felt it was, that's such an important part of any improvements to be made at the lake. You know, sewer's almost involved in all of them. Not all of them, but most of them. So we wanted to get that report back before we move forward with the list of priority items.
Well, thank you, Debbie and Carl. So we go to the next item, initial discussion on the capital improvement plan for 2019 to 24, and recommending any related matters. Carl?
The window for CIP submitting and updating projects for CIP for the coming year, 2019, coming next 5 years, 2019 to 2024, opened up earlier this week. I added it to the agenda so you know what our thoughts are in terms of what we need to do. I'm not sure how long it's going to stay open for the public, but it'll likely go well into January. So even if we miss something today, don't worry about it. We'll catch it in the next month or two. What we're going to do is update all the existing projects. You've seen in your packet, there's a whole list of them. There's two likely that'll come off because they're about to be complete or will be complete about the time that this new CIP gets adopted. One is the restroom at Quad 2 at the Texas Bank Sports Complex. It should be finished this January. And then the parking lot at the Station 618 for the senior centers has begun construction and will be pretty well on its way by the time this new plan gets adopted. So we may keep it in there just for that, but it's going to be close to being done by the time this gets adopted. So we may pull that one out. But the other ones we'll update in terms of timing and all the other pages, but we'll keep them the same. As far as future improvements, there has been recently in the last month talk about consideration of a new park. I'm thinking neighborhood park for the far southwest area. If you can picture Twin Mountain Drive between the Southland area and the lake. It's a growing residential area. It's one of the fastest growing areas in the city, and there's no park planned for that area at this moment, and there's no property identified for a park. So we will add that as a future project. I don't necessarily have much hope in getting the funds to develop a park there, but at least if we can identify the property and acquire some property, at least we can secure it for future development. The other item is, and this is why I think we're going to be covered, what we're able to do for bigger projects, for instance, like the Coliseum. We have pretty much a standing sheet for the Coliseum so that when we have improvements that we need to do, we identify what those possible improvements are, and they're in the CIP so that we're good legally to move forward the project as long as we get the funding and council's approval. So this is what I will do for Lake Nasworthy, is submit a sheet that has Lake Nasworthy, talks about the different improvements we've been discussing, so that it's just a matter of updating it when we know what goes before the public. I think that's all we had.
Any question for Carl as far as the CIP is concerned, other than the lake projects that will be added as in one single consideration with all these sub-projects? We don't know what it is right now.
I don't think so.
Okay. So any other questions? Well, I have a question. Maybe I think the past years we went through a prioritization of the projects. The first one was a list from 1 to 20 or 25. The second one was 3 blocks of projects. The first one was real priority. The second one was secondary priority, and the third one was long-term. How did that work for you guys, staff?
It helps us to focus on what we should identify as higher priority versus lower priority. It helps us spend our time better, focusing on the higher priority projects. I don't have that list with me, but yes, you're right. The first year we scored and ranked everything 1 through 25. The last time we put it in blocks, high priority, moderate priority, lower priority, and we did that the last couple of years. We could do it again this year. We're only adding a couple of new items, but we could readdress that list of priorities if you want to.
Well, I think the first year we didn't have a clue of what the projects were. And then we added a few as we were going, and we stuck them into some place. Teresa, I guess, mentioned the fact that we had a committee to do that, a subcommittee to do that.
Right.
Do you recommend that we go with subcommittee again? And what format do you want to use?
I think at this point, since in my opinion, I think we're just kind of updating and tweaking. I say just let us present at the next meeting what we think those priorities should be, and then the board can tell us if y'all agree or not.
Okay, and then you added the idea of a new park. It looks like we already have 3 other parks that are, I guess, wished. One is in the north, next to Lakeview, and the 2 other ones, plus a new one. So what do we do with new parks as a general conversation? Do you want to have it now or next time? Because I think one of the mission of, I guess, the city is to create parks wherever there are none that can service families, mostly, that are moving in these areas. So does that become a priority item? What is the priority? Is that the newest, or is that the oldest? I mean, I think I'm a bit bothered by the fact that we don't have a general idea of how we treat parks. And not pocket parks. Pocket parks, I understand, but the bigger parks.
Well, that brings up a good point, because in our other service holes, we haven't necessarily identified the property or the funds to acquire those properties. So if we're talking about this one in the southwest, we should also be doing it for the others. For instance, the Bluffs, the Lakeview area have service holes without any property identified necessarily for a park. So I could send out that list that we had last time that showed the priorities, and then I could add that to the agenda for the next meeting to talk about. I'm just not clear, how we address those in terms of priorities, because, like I said, I don't necessarily have a whole lot of hope of getting funding to develop the parks, but it's possible to acquire the properties. So it may be a two-step process, and it doesn't necessarily fit with priorities.
No, do we have, in general, a master plan that says that area start to be developed, like the Southwest you were talking about? It's time to look at properties, because at the end, just like the Bluffs, there's nothing left, or very little left. So it's more a process, and you're right, the first thing to do is to secure the land. Then after that comes the financing for the development and the equipment. But if there's no land, there's no park. So
Right.
how do we treat that in the CIP? Just acquire the land for a park?
Well, I don't know if that. I mean, because funding is not necessarily connected with the CIP process. CIP is more about identifying the projects that need to happen. Funding is a separate process for those projects. I've just got a couple of thoughts. One is our Parks and Recreation Open Space Master Plan. The ideal is to have that at least in a 5-year window. Our current plan expired in 2017. So we are working to round up funds for the next year to update that plan. So in that plan, it'll talk about much of what you're talking about. So that's a little bit more longer term, but shorter term, I think the board, we can set up a subcommittee if you'd like. I don't have an issue with that. But maybe just have a separate item to talk about this at a board meeting. And maybe we just go through the list of all the different projects and say, should
But
this...
I propose that we put it at the next meeting agenda as an item.
Okay.
And if we need a subcommittee, we will decide it at the time. I don't know how much is there to do. The first time there definitely was nothing. So we had to be together less than 5
Well,
to do that. But this time I don't know.
Well, in my mind, it's actually one process is to identify and prioritize projects. The other is what do you do next once you've done that? I think that's more the question of what you're talking about now.
Okay.
Because I think we need to update our list and update the priorities, and then follow up on which of these projects do we need to start tackling? What do we need to do for each? Does this one go on the back burner? Does this one move up? Do we acquire property for this one? Do we try to get funding to actually do this project? I think that's the discussion you're wanting to have.
Okay. Any other consideration? Okay, so we consider that item closed. Next, consideration of future agenda items. So we just added something.
Got it?
What about other things that you guys want to know? Maybe some updates or, well, a little update on the sculpture garden.
Okay.
There was a competition, and there was a winner.
Right, and at the last council meeting, I should have emailed Joe, but the last council meeting, city council approved us negotiating with that firm to do the design work,
Okay, so just an update next time.
okay?
What else? Not much going on in San Angelo at this time.
You can always email me.
Okay,
Has there been any updates on the Santa Fe golf course planning? Have you heard any updates on that?
About kind of re-envisioning it.
Uh-huh.
Not really. I mean, I can email you just the current
Well, a
status,
meeting
but
hasn't
there's
taken place, but-
nothing really to report to the board.
Right. And as far as your new master plan that you're updating, how's that, you might report to us how that's coming together, or?
Sure, I'm
I haven't
trying to
seen
round
that
up the
in many years.
funding.
That's why I
I'm
asked.
trying, I think you were involved in.
The first
yeah,
one, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, the first one was in 1967.
Oh, not that
So
one.
not that far back. There was one done in 67, and the next one was done in 2001. I'm rounding up the funding at this point, so
Great.
I need to get the funding first, then we'll move forward with the process. And I've got some matching funds for it right now.
okay. That's it. Hopefully something will happen. When is the next meeting?
January 24.
January 24th. Okay, well, if there's no other consideration, then we'll adjourn, but I would like to thank the city attorney for being extremely precise. And I think it was very helpful, at least for me. Also, wish you guys a happy holidays and a great time until we meet again. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Thank you. Second? So,
Second that.
thank you. So we adjourned. Thank you.